entire book? Does everybody have one? Perfect. Okay. All right. You can go ahead and start getting all situated and figuring out how you want to go about this. We're going to go through this copy of the Proverbs, and because the book of Proverbs is such a unique book, we are going to have a very unique approach to it as far as AC3 is concerned. But Proverbs is it stands alone in the canon. It's not quite like any other book. For one, is the sheer breadth of the topics that it discusses. It's virtually limitless application that Solomon attempts to address. But it is so special and it's so worthy of study because what we hold in our hands right now, as you hold these pieces of paper in your hands, are, I would venture, the answer to every single "what do I do now?" question that you've ever asked. But learning how to navigate all of that information is a study all its own. And I'm not talking about the study of it, I'm talking about learning how to study it, learning how to navigate it. There's just so much information. It's less than 1,000 verses, but there is such a quantity of thought within it. In my years of being a Bible student, I have probably read the book of Proverbs multiple dozens of times. Multiple times I've read through this book. And I know that there's Calvary pastors out there who have probably read this book up to 1,000 times over their years of walking with the Lord. And yet I can guarantee you that even those pastors who have read it all those times cannot recall the perfect proverb every single time that they need it. There's just so much to be aware of. But we need to understand that that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is not to have that exact perfect proverb every single time you run into a question. The point of the book is not to be a book of a bunch of different answers for a bunch of different scenarios. Rather, it is to place the only answer to all of life questions deep within you, and that principle, that answer is found in Proverbs 1:7, Proverbs 1:7, and Proverbs 9:10. Those two verses, Proverbs 1:7 and Proverbs 9:10, are the exact same answer seen from two different areas. They both tell you basically the same thing. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Wisdom begins when you learn to fear God. That is the answer to everything. The fear of the Lord is the very secret to life. That is what the book of Proverbs teach you. If you remember those old bracelets that used to run around that said, "What would Jesus do?" on them? This points in a similar direction, but the answer to it is not what Jesus do, it is what should you do if you have the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the secret to life. It's why Jesus taught us to pray the way that he did. And what's the very first thing that you pray about when you start that Our Father? It's by understanding who you're praying to. Everything flows from that. The relationship that you have with him, his placement within all of this, that he is above us in heaven. And once we grasp that concept and make it the core of our lives, that quality of who the Lord is, then we find that the rest of the book of Proverbs teaches us how to apply that one truth to all of our lives. Then we start to see in every situation that you run into, there's this proverb and that proverb, but they're all telling you the same thing. Do all things in the fear of the Lord. For the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Wisdom begins when we learn to fear God. So I'm going to start reading in verse 1. And I'll explain kind of how I use my system, how it is that I break up the book of Proverbs. It makes sense to my brain. If it makes sense differently to your brain, please use the way that makes sense to you. But let me start reading in verse 1, and we're just going to read and talk as we go through. So starting in verse 1, Solomon writes this, Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand sayings of understandings, to gain insightful instruction, righteousness and justice and equity, to give shrewdness to the simple, knowledge and purpose to the young. May the wise hear and increase learning, and the one who gains direction to understand a proverb and an expression, words of wisdom and their riddle. Pay attention now because here's the key verse. Fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Wisdom and instruction, fools despise. Those 7 verses form the introduction to this entire book. The mission statement is found in those first few verses, verses 2 through 5. That's what the book is about. If you look at the cover of the printout that Deborah wonderfully did for you guys, you'll see those verses on there. Why? Because that's the point of the book, to help ingrain all of this into you. But what is the key? The fear of the Lord. If you don't have the fear of the Lord, these will not be proverbs of wisdom to you. They're more like fortune cookies then, nifty sayings every once in a while that you might remember. But if you have the fear of the Lord, then it becomes wisdom to you and can affect all of your life. This book is a collection of proverbs, mostly penned by Solomon, for the purpose of conveying wisdom to Solomon's sons. And I need you to understand, that is the context of the vast majority of the book. It is King Solomon talking to his kids, primarily the one who's going to be the next king of Israel. And remember, just like we saw in Deuteronomy, when Moses and Joshua is being commissioned and the leadership is passing between the two, and the two of them are called to the tent of meeting. They don't go inside the tent. Even though it's a private commissioning ceremony, where is it done? Out in the open, where everyone can see. Why? Because this is a private meeting, but it's not a secret meeting. And the wisdom that was handed out there was for us, just like this. Solomon is talking to his son. It's a private conversation. But it is recorded for all of us, for all of Israel, so that we can all learn. We come to this book seeking wisdom. It's one of the most common prayer requests that I get. It's usually the most. Every once in a while, prayers for healing surpass it, but by and large, what people ask for is they ask for wisdom. Asking the Lord to show me what it is that he wants me to do next. And that's what this book is. It's a book of wisdom. But wisdom's a curious word, because what does it mean? Wisdom is not a collection of facts. You know people in your lives, people that are extremely book smart, but they are dumb as a rock. They couldn't get through this life without somebody making sure that they don't fall through a hole. Collection of facts is knowledge, but wisdom is knowledge rightly applied. Wisdom is knowledge rightly applied. It is knowing what to do, when to do it, and why you did it at all. That is what wisdom is, knowledge rightly applied. Knowing what to do, when to do it, and why you did it at all. And this is why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the why behind all the actions of the righteous. The reason I do this and not that, why? The fear of the Lord. The reason why I seek wisdom at all, why? The fear of the Lord. We do what we're supposed to do, when we're supposed to do it, because we understand now that that is what is pleasing to God. And we don't seek wisdom because we're scared of God. But we seek to live lives pleasing to God because we now agree, after we have the fear of the Lord within us, that his way to live life is the best way to live life. And I look around, we have tried multiple different paths through life. We have tried our own ways enough to have enough bumps and bruises to go, you know what? Let's try it the Lord's way instead. Now, if you're like me and you're kind of a visual learner, you like arrows and underlines and stuff like that inside of your Bibles, what I have this first section, these first 7 verses, is a big bracket all the way around them. So I know that it's introduction. It says introduction. In my Bible, the way I did it and the way that I did it for this Proverbs study, if you look at my copy of it, and you're more than welcome to, is that anything that is kind of good and I want to lean towards, I have it underlined in yellow. Anything that I really want to hold on to, I have in green. Green for go ahead and do this. Anything I want to lean from, not necessarily it's sin, but I don't want to be that. I'm leaning away from it, I have underlined in red. If it's like an abomination or something God really hates, then I have like big boxes around it and I've colored it in. So I can see, just looking at the page, okay, these are the things I don't want to be. Anything that lifts my eyes to heaven, such as the name of the Lord or pronouns that I know that are just referring to God, I have in blue. That nice calming color as my eyes pass through the page, but I can see passages that I have these blue blocks all over it. Why? Because this is a portion where God's going, this is what's pleasing to me, and he's actively involved in what it is that he wants me to do. So generally speaking, that's the system that I use for it. Very simple, it's not as complex as others, but it works for my brain. Please use whatever works best for you. Now that we have the introduction out of the way, starting in verse 8, we are going to have the first of what I call the 8 my child sections. Now, I haven't found any reputable scholar that uses the same terminology, so please use whatever it is that works for you. But in my head, as we go through, they kind of break out into neat little themes. And these are sections where Solomon is talking to his kid. We're going to actually see this all the way through chapter 9. And it's starting in chapter 10. Chapter 10 is going to start with the Proverbs of Solomon. It's a different section of the book. That's going to be the next section we go to, and we're going to work our way towards that. But first, we just have these chapters, almost a third of the entire book, where Solomon's just talking to his kids, preparing the next leader of Israel. But starting here in verse 8, we see that it's addressed to my child, Brilliant Anthony. That's why I call them the my child sections. Almost all of them start with my child. One of them will start with children. We'll talk about that when we get to that particular one. After that, we have 1.5 chapters on wisdom, personified as a woman, half chapter on foolishness, also personified. But as we start to go into verse 8, take a look real quick at verse 7 to understand two concepts from the very beginning. And we're going to see these two concepts throughout the book of Proverbs. There is wisdom, which is to be desired, and whoever rejects wisdom, that person is a fool. As we go through the book of Proverbs, those are your two choices. You can be a wise person, or you can be a fool. But there are no wise fools. There is no place in between. Those are your only choices. Wisdom or foolish, wise or fool, righteous or wicked, that is it. And this book, the vast majority of it will be presented as a contrast between these two polar opposites. Because there is the wise and the fool, and no other option than these. So my child, section number 1. Starting in verse 8, my child, may you keep your father's instruction and do not reject your mother's teachings. For they are a garland of favor for your head and pendants for your neck. My child, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, we shall lie in wait for blood, and we shall ambush the innocent without cause. Like Sheol, we will swallow them alive and whole, like those who descend to the pit. Now, what we see here is Solomon building a contrast. Remember, we keep seeing this. Wise and fool, wicked and righteous. The wicked and the foolish fall into the exact same camp, because both the foolish and the wicked despise wisdom. They do not fear the Lord. Now, we need to understand that the foolish are not necessarily wicked right from the jump. But the foolish don't have wisdom to protect them from being like the wicked. There's no boundary, there's no gate. Little things that they get suckered into just will lead them to that camp of wickedness. And before you know it, they're surrounded by wicked people and they have no choice but to agree. Here we see Solomon directly address one of the earliest pitfalls of any youth. Before the sexual temptation that he will propose later on and he will vividly warn his kids about, here's the first one that kids have: peer pressure. It comes upon you so quickly. Even as little kids, you don't want to be the weird one, the one on the outside. It doesn't go away as adults. Even among ourselves, there's times that we fear something like this. We don't want to be seen as the odd one out. The temptation to go along in order to get along. It doesn't go away. But long before some of the other temptations that we see, peer pressure raises its ugly head. But we'll see it vividly later on in the life of Rehoboam, the first son of Solomon that takes the throne, in 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12. You may remember this when we studied through it. That was when Rehoboam took the throne, and all of Israel came to him and said, can you lighten up the taxes? Your dad was kind of rough on us. Now, Rehoboam goes to the elders, right? Those who represented wisdom. And they said, do what the people said. Just back it off a little bit. Your dad asked for a lot. And we built all kinds of great stuff, but we don't need to do those building projects anymore. So if you do this, they'll love you. They'll serve you forever. He goes, all right. So then what does he do? He goes to his buddies. And that's where peer pressure kicks in. He goes, what should we do? And you go, you should tell them they ain't seen nothing yet. And he agrees with them. Why? Because he listened to those who are fools. He listened to these inexperienced kids that he grew up with, who told him to increase the pressure. Their counsel was like verse 11, come, let us lie in wait to ambush the innocent without cause. They weren't punishing the people because they were bad. They hadn't done anything to deserve their counsel. And rather than fear the Lord and pursue wisdom, he listened to the counsel of foolish men, wicked men, and the nation split apart. So he's not talking just to talk. He's talking because he needs to be heard. And right from the very first chapter of it, we see if Rehoboam had only listened to his dad, how much heartache could the nation have been saved? In verse 13, though, the wicked men are still going on with their pitch, right? They're trying to sell this young person to join their group, and they say, verse 13, we shall find all precious wealth. We shall fill our houses with booty. You shall throw your lot in our midst. There will be one purse for us all. Now that's the hook. We're all into this together. All for one and one for all. We're all going to pool our money and we're all going to get rich. You want to be part of the group, don't you? You don't want to be the only one left out. We're all going to benefit except for you. You'll be the only one not having fun. Now Solomon cuts through the clutter. He urges his child, run from the wicked. Because their pitch is different from the reality. He tells them, don't trust them. Don't join them. There is no honor among thieves. If they don't care for the innocent, they don't care for the weak, they definitely don't care about you. The wicked talk about riches, but verse 15 shows their true path. My child, do not walk in their way. Keep your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they hurry to shed blood. That's what they really plan to do. But what they do in vain. Verse 17, for in vain is the net scattered, in the sight of any winged bird. They lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. Thus are the ways of all who are greedy for gain. It will take the life of its possessors. Now here's why the wicked are like fools. Because the wicked are dumber than a bird. You can't let a bird be there and you go and put a trap and then the bird fall into it. The bird's too smart for that. They're going to know whatever it is you just did, that's the one thing I'm not going to get involved in. But here, the wicked set a trap that they themselves fall into. It's like those wonderful Bugs Bunny cartoons of my childhood. And you see Wile E. Coyote setting up this thing, and you know somehow this is going to backfire on him. That's the wicked. This is what they do. Now, starting in verse 20, after he's told them, stay away from wicked men, they're going to fall into the trap they dig, we see this first appearance of wisdom personified and presented as a woman, calling out to those who need wisdom. Now, I want this image to start to burn into your head. We're going to see it deeply in chapter 8. But this is how Solomon presents wisdom for the first time in the text. We haven't seen wisdom come up yet. This is it. And anytime you go through the book and you're like, man, Solomon's really beating up on the gals. When you read passage and verse after verse about the nagging wife and the unwise mother or the adulteress, remember, this is the first presentation of a woman as the personification of wisdom. We'll talk about that a little bit more in chapter 8, why that is so extremely special in this book. But let me go ahead and mention something now, because I've had people ask me this as we got ready for this Proverbs study. And the question is, there's all these verses about women. Problematic women and nagging women is better to live out in the desert than in a house with a contentious woman and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, man, Solomon's really tough on the girls. Where's the verses for the guys? The verses for the guys are all the other verses. Anytime you see the word fool, he's talking to the guys. He's saying, don't be this. Don't be this. It doesn't mean that those verses can't apply to the ladies. It's not like the ones for the ladies can't apply to the guys as well. But the vast majority of the book is to the guys. And we'll talk about why that is in a second as well. But we need to understand that this is how wisdom is presented. Right here in this place of this woman who is crying out, who's desperate for the people to listen to what it is that she has to say. Because wisdom is something to be treasured and held close. You're to have an intimate relationship with it. It is to be a part of your life. And the idea is not that girls don't matter. Even though the majority of the book is written, a dad talking to his sons. Now, we need to understand that the reason why it's presented like that is the idea is of one leader handing down wisdom to the next leader. And it is that leader's job then to use that wisdom to protect the generation that comes under them, to pour wisdom into them, and then to train up the next leader to do the exact same thing. Later on, we'll see this. When Solomon goes, and what I'm teaching you, my dad taught me. And right there, we see the way the transfer goes. One leader teaches the next leader. And who does God require that responsibility of? The men. He doesn't require it of the women. Doesn't mean that women don't have a place to play. Again, we'll talk about that in chapter 8. But this is the idea, and this is why it's presented this way. And it's also why wisdom is presented as a woman. So, verse 20. Wisdom calls out in the streets. In the squares, she raises her voice. On a busy corner, she cries out. At the entrances of the gates in the city, she speaks her saying. Now, right there, we'll see this again in Proverbs 8. But I remember this commercial from this former sheriff in Louisiana. Some of you may have seen it. And he's sitting there and he's talking to gangbangers and stuff like that in the area. And as he starts to close out this commercial, he says this, and if you want to throw down, I'll meet you anytime, anywhere. I ain't hard to find. This is what wisdom is. She's not hard to find. She presents herself out there. She makes herself easy to find because her message is pure. She doesn't have to hide it away. She doesn't have to whisper it in the corners, as opposed to the woman that we'll see later on that's trying to trap people in sexual temptation. She does hers in the side alleys and in the corners. But the wisdom doesn't hide. She knows what she stands for, will stand up to scrutiny. So she cries out in verse 22 a very bold message. How long, O simple ones, will you love simplicity? And how long will scoffers delight in their scoffing? And fools hate knowledge. May you turn to my argument. Behold, I shall pour out my spirit upon you. I will make my words known to you. Now, super brief aside, right there, that last little phrase in verse 23 is both an invitation, come and learn, and I'll make my words known to you. I'll show you that they're wisdom. Also, it's a warning. Because if you refuse my words are still going to be made known to you. You're going to know that they're wisdom by the pain that you receive. Verse 24, because I called out and you refused me. I stretched out my hand, yet there is none who heeds. You have ignored my counsel and my reproof. You are not willing to accept. I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when pain comes upon you. When your panic comes like a storm and your calamity arrives like a whirlwind, when stress and anguish come upon you, then you will call me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but not find me, since they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of Yahweh. They were not willing to accept my counsel. They despised all my reproof. Now, by verse 28 that we just read, you may want to write two Bible references. 1 Samuel 8:18. 1 Samuel 8:18, right there by verse 28. 1 Samuel 8:18 and Isaiah 55:6. Isaiah 55:6. 1 Samuel 8:18 says this, then you will cry out in that day, because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. In Isaiah 55:6, we read this, seek the Lord while he may be found, call upon him while he is near. This is the reality of choosing a life apart from God. It's not that God abandons us when we incur the repercussions of our sins, but actions have consequences. And at some point, a good father needs to allow us to take our lumps. As parents, we understand this, right? I tell you and I tell you and I tell you to stop doing that thing, and at some point, I got to kind of let you run into the wall a little bit because you won't listen to my words. I'm trying to save you pain. But pain is the great attention grabber, and sometimes you got to feel a little pain in order to get the lesson. If we will not stop rebelling against him, if we refuse the Lord's wisdom, at some point we're going to receive the pain. It is this idea of reaping what we sow, which is a Galatians 6:7 idea, reaping what we sow, Galatians 6:7, that we see in verse 31. And you may want to write that in the margin. We're going to come back to this verse later on. But Galatians 6:7 says, you will reap what you sow. Don't be deceived. Your God is not mocked. And then in verse 31, we see this laid out. They shall eat from the fruit of their way. Whatever they sowed into the ground, that's what they're going to reap. And they shall be sated, which means they're going to be filled up from their own schemes. Doesn't mean they're going to be full. It means that wisdom is going to take the fruits of that and just stuff it inside of them and go, this is what you want, have your fill. It is this kind of idea that you may hear some pastors talk about when God's telling Israel that if you keep disobeying me, I'm going to send you to Babylon where you're going to serve foreign gods that you have not known until you have gods coming out your nose. It doesn't say that anywhere in the scripture. But this is where the concept exists. If you insist upon refusing me, at some point I'm going to let you have your fill of what you want. Verse 32, for the waywardness of the simple ones will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. Whoever listens to me will dwell in security and rest securely from dread and disaster. Again, we see those contexts, the contrast between the two, the wise and the foolish and the way that they live. Chapter 2 now. Now, chapter 2 begins the second, my child, section. So what I have big brackets and I have arrows that are point up. So the first one for the My Child 1 has an arrow going down that says, all right, all the way to the last verse of chapter 1. And it helps me as I'm turning pages to go, oh, this is all part of this big section. Again, I'm a visual learner. I like arrows. It helps me out. But here we have the second My Child section, and this section has a concentrated theme as Solomon conveys to his child the protective benefits of wisdom. The protective benefits of wisdom. Verse 1. My child, if you will receive my sayings and hide my commands with you, in order to incline your ear toward wisdom, then you shall apply your heart to understanding. For if you cry out for understanding, if you lift your voice for insight, now pay attention here, if you seek her like silver and search for her out like treasure, then you will understand the fear of Yahweh, and the knowledge of God you will find. For Yahweh will give wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. In verse 5, we have a connection all the way back to Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But what these verses show is that wisdom is only found with God. This book is not a book of wisdom insofar as if you memorize it, then you have wisdom. Again, that's just knowledge. Only God can give wisdom. Understanding is only found with him. It's why I say at the end of so many teachings, let me tell you about the one who makes all of this make sense. Because I'm convinced he's the only one that makes it all make sense. Life doesn't make sense apart from Jesus. I've tried enough roads, and I know you guys have too. And there's a reason why that we just come to Jesus and we stay right there, because we have tried other avenues and none of them work. For us, all our answers are in Jesus. It's not a cop-out. It's true, because we've tried and ruled out everything else. And once you understand that, then you have the fear of the Lord. Your way to live life is the only way to live. And that's the beginning of wisdom. And that's why when we understand that wisdom only comes from God, we do what James wrote in James 1:5. James 1:5, if any of you lack wisdom, do what? Ask of God. Don't memorize the book of Proverbs. Don't memorize the whole Bible. Don't know the law inside and out. Ask God. Ask him for wisdom only comes from him. And yes, he's going to turn you right back to the Bible. But now with his Holy Spirit in you, the words on the page will actually make sense. So in these verses, particularly 2, 3, and 4, Solomon tells his kid what Jesus will ask us in Matthew 7:7. Matthew 7:7, ask, and you will receive. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened unto you. So keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking. Search after wisdom more than you would search after silver. Value her more than you would treasure. God will give you wisdom when you value wisdom, for from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Now, Solomon keeps going, verse 7. For the upright, he stores sound judgment, a shield for those who walk uprightly, in order to guard paths of justice and keep the ways of his faithful ones. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and uprightness, every good course. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasing to your soul. Discretion will watch over you. Now, verse 11, here's where the protection starts. Discretion will watch over you. Understanding will protect you in order to deliver you from the way of evil, from a man who speaks devious things. Those who forsake the paths of uprightness to walk in ways of darkness. Those who are happy to do evil, for they delight in the deviousness of evil, who are crooked in their ways and devious in their paths, in order to deliver you from a strange woman, from a foreign woman who flatters with her sayings. She who forsakes the partner of her youth and has forgotten the covenant of her God. For her house sinks to death, and to the dead are her paths. Of all who go to her, none shall return, nor do they reach paths of life. In verses 12 through 19, we see two recurring themes that are going to appear throughout this book. It is the idea of the wicked man and the temptress. The wicked man and the temptress. Now, these are stand-ins yet again, just like we'll see with wisdom and the woman of folly later on. Yes, there are individuals like this for sure. But the thought behind the figure is not that all men are women, or all men are wicked and all women are sexual traps. That's not the idea. Rather, they represent two great dangers to a young man. And remember, that's the initial context. In order to understand any of the verses, understand who's doing the writing and who's doing the listening, and then we can understand the message. This is King Solomon talking to his kid that's going to be the next king. And he warns him, these are the two things you must avoid: the wicked man and the temptress. As he tells the leader of the next family, beware the desire for power at the expense of the weak, and beware opportunities to chase the lust of the flesh, particularly sexual lust. And it's not that women are somehow immune to these temptations. Not at all. But the way they're presented on the page in the book of Proverbs is because these temptations are the ones that are the most alluring to men. So Solomon begs his kids, press in and seek after wisdom. Keep knocking on that door, and God will give you what you need. So that, verse 20, so that you will walk on the road of those who are good, and the paths of those who are righteous you shall keep. For those who are upright will dwell in the land, and those who are blameless will remain in it. See, his hope is that they will stay on the path where they're supposed to be. Yes, sometimes you run into the wicked, even on the path of righteousness. They somehow manage to get their way for a moment on there. But if you walk in their paths, you're always going to run into the wicked. They will always get their hooks in you. And this is what wisdom does. It acts like guardrails. It keeps us in the place where we need to be. Discretion will watch over you. Wisdom will protect you. This is what fools don't have. There's nothing to keep them away from the wicked. They constantly find themselves in places where they should not be. And verse 22 tells us about the wicked. And those who are wicked, so here's the contrast, will be cut off from the land. The righteous stay in the land, but the wicked are cut off. And those who are treacherous will be uprooted from it. Chapter 3 now. Chapter 3, we begin the third, my child, section. Verse 1, my child, do not forget my instruction. And we keep seeing this plea. And every parent understands this, right? Because how many times did you have to tell your kids something? Thousands of times. Through all kinds of ages and all kinds of seasons of life. Over and over again. And you're looking at him, you're like, please just listen to what I'm telling you. Don't forget my instruction. Verse 1, may your heart guard my commands. For length of days, years of life, and peace they shall add to you. May loyal love and truth not forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them upon your heart. And you shall find favor and good sense in the eyes of God and humankind. Now, starting in verse 5, after he gives this initial plea to listen, he gives a series of 4 commands, the Father telling the Son, that will protect the Son from pride, and to exhort the child to lean on God. As we read the first one in verse 5 and 6, remember, Solomon's the one who's saying this. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived after Jesus, said this: trust Yahweh with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. Who said this? Solomon. If any person could have leaned on their own understanding, it was him. He was smart enough to figure out a way to get out of any box, out of any trap, and yet even he says, don't lean on your own understanding. Don't lean on your own mind. Instead, verse 6, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will straighten your paths. Now, all of that is one command, but it's a 3-part command. Trust God, don't lean on yourself, and acknowledge him in all of your ways. The second command is in verse 7 and 8. It is also a 3-part command. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear Yahweh and retreat from evil. Those are the 3 commands. And if you do those 3 commands, there shall be healing for your flesh and refreshment for your body. The 3rd command comes in verses 9 and 10. Now, this is a singular command. Honor Yahweh from your substance, and from the first fruits of all that will come to you. And your barns shall be full of plenty, and your vats shall burst with new wine. Now, we could apply that principle, the principle within that, to tithing. But the idea is much greater than that. That's not where you go and go, see, listen, this is where it says you need to do that. If you don't do it, you don't honor God, and you're going to be in trouble. That's not what he's saying. He says, honor God from your substance. The idea is everything that you have, everything that you are belong to God. Therefore, use all of it to declare his honor. It's Romans 12:1. Romans 12:1. Present your bodies. All that you are, Paul writes in Romans 12:1. Give all that you are as a living and holy sacrifice to God, which is your reasonable service. It's the bare minimum you should give to God. That's how you honor God. That's how you glorify the King, by using all that you are to his glory. The 4th command is in verse 11 and 12. It's the same command said 2 different ways. Do not despise the discipline of Yahweh, my child. Do not be weary of his reproof. Because whomever Yahweh will love, he will rebuke, as a father delights in his son. And it's a beautiful one to end on for these 4 commands. Because we understand. We all been kids. If you have kids, you know. You tell them, this is going to hurt you or me more than it's going to hurt you. And when you're a little kid, you're like, there's no way that this hurts you more than it hurts me, until you have to do it and you understand the brokenness of your heart. But if I didn't care about you, I wouldn't correct you. I would just let you go and act a fool. But because I love you, because I care about your future, I pour into you. And this is what God does for us. Starting in verse 13, Solomon begins to explain how wonderful wisdom is. He gives these commands, right? First he begs, listen to me. Then he commands, and now he explains, because wisdom is so wonderful. How blessed you are if you have wisdom in your life. And I love verses 13 through 15. They're some of my absolute most favorite verses about wisdom. Verse 13, happy is the one who finds wisdom and who obtains understanding, for her income is better than the income of silver, and her revenue than that of gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all your desires shall not compare with her. Length of days is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life for those who seize her. Those who take hold of her are considered happy. Now, I love the idea within them. It tells us how precious she is. And there's that idea. Nothing compares to her. Anything that you want in your life is less than wisdom. If you can only have one possession, that's the one to have. And then he compares her to a tree of life. And it's magnificent, because when you see those words, you need to go to 1 to 2 places. In the first couple of chapters of Genesis and the last couple of chapters of Revelation. And now here's the neat thing. When you study through the Bible, in the chapters that have the tree of life, those first 2 and the last 2 are the only chapters in the Bible that don't have sin. All the chapters in between address the fall of mankind, but not the first 2 and not the last 2. And that's what wisdom does. It takes you to that place. It gives you a place of belonging with the King. In verse 19 through 20, we see that even God holds wisdom dear. So he's telling his boy, please take hold of wisdom. I'm telling you, it's so precious and it's true. And even the Lord values wisdom. Even the Lord holds wisdom dear. And he uses wisdom to accomplish his great works. We will see this greatly expanded in chapter 8. Now, the idea here is not that God didn't have wisdom. He needed to find wisdom. And now that he has wisdom, he holds it dear. We understand wisdom only comes from God. But the idea here is kind of like when you go to watch a movie and you're having to kind of just suspend belief just a little bit in order to enjoy the movie. It's one of the reasons why Kendra doesn't like to watch like police shows with me, because I can't suspend my disbelief. I'm like, that's not how they do it. That's not what happens. And she goes, leave. Monk is doing his thing, and so I have to leave the room. But what we have here is this understanding of the idea within it. Solomon is trying to express the value of wisdom by comparing her to riches, to a tree of life, showing how God used his wisdom when he created the world. Verse 19. Yahweh in wisdom founded the earth. He established the heavens in understanding. With his knowledge, depths broke open and clouds dropped dew. Starting in verse 21, we see the fourth my child section. Here, Solomon pleads with the child to hold on to wisdom. Let wisdom not escape your sight. Now, I'm totally fine if you go, you know what, I kind of want to group this into the one we were just in. I have this back and forth going. I want to have your way with it, whatever you like. But in my head, it feels like the theme changes just a little bit. As he goes, my child, verse 21, may they not escape your sight. May you keep sound wisdom and prudence. They shall be life for your soul and adornment for your neck. Then you shall walk in the confidence of your ways, and your foot will not stumble. If you sit down, you will not panic. And if you lie down, then your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden panic or the storm of wickedness that will come. This is the wisdom of holding on to wisdom. Because you have discernment, because you have wisdom, and wisdom comes from where? The Lord. Where does wisdom begin? The fear of the Lord. And because you have this relationship with the king and you understand that he's always the king, all things pass through your hands, and you truly hold on to it, it is harder for you to be all shaken up. Your foundation is stronger. It's tied to the Lord. We rely upon him, not upon our own understanding. That's what Solomon said. So when the storm does come, verse 25, as the storm's coming, we have verse 26. Yahweh will be your confidence. And guard your foot from capture. Sometimes that's just what the storm does. It shakes you up so that you have to look and go, well, can I trust my own understanding? Can I trust the efforts of my hand? Or do I have to lean on something greater than me? And it's to our embarrassment at times that it takes that sometimes. Why can't we just learn the lesson the one time? But how many times have we gone into a storm and go, I've been here before. Didn't I learn this lesson already? Sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes you need to learn it deeper and more. Because of wisdom and because we fear the Lord, though, Solomon instructs his kids to conduct their behavior with others in accordance with justice. Now, this instruction is in the form of 5 do-nots. The first 4 do-nots are prohibitions against active, overt sins. He says, don't do this. Verse 27, do not withhold good from its owner when it's in your power to do so. If you have the ability to be a blessing, be a blessing. Verse 28, do not say to your neighbor, go and return, and tomorrow I will give it when it is with you. Don't delay a blessing. Even if you go, well, I'll do it tomorrow. No, you can do it now, do it now. Verse 29, do not plot harm against your neighbor who dwells in confidence beside you. Do not quarrel with anyone without cause when he did not do you harm. Now, those are 4 active ideas. Even the one where you're planning, you're like, no, it's not on the outside. It is. It's an action, right? Now, the 5th do not is in verse 31. And this one addresses more of a passive issue, a heart issue. Because the Lord knows that we might not do the first 4 things. It's very Pharisee-like. I do this and I don't do that, but I'm really just cleaning the outside of the cup and the inside is full of mud. He says, don't be like a whitewashed tomb. Don't be dead man bones on the inside and look real good on the outside. I want the inside and the outside all cleaned up. So God tells us, and Solomon tells us the 5th one, do not envy a man of violence. Do not choose any of his ways. Don't even desire that you could have lived like that. Look at them do something, and you go, you know what, I kind of wish I could do that too. I wouldn't. I'm too good for that. Don't even desire what it is that they choose to do. Why? Because verse 32, for he who is perverse is a what? An abomination of Yahweh. And in my Bible, in my workbook, I have it all in red blocks. Because this is one I want to make sure I am not. Oh Lord, may this never define me. Because this is repugnant to you. Instead, I want to be like the second half of 32. But those who are upright are his confidence. The idea is of intimacy. The people you tell your secrets to. The people you bring over when you feel vulnerable. It's that kind of closeness, that kind of tightness that he wants to have with us. Now, verse 33 through 35 have the negative consequences for those who are wicked. And the blessings for those who are upright. Verse 33, the curse of Yahweh is on the house of the wicked, and the abode of the righteous ones he blesses. With those who scorn, he is scornful, but to those who are humble, he gives favor. They will inherit the honor of the wise, but stubborn fools disgrace. Now note that back and forth quality of the verses. It kind of have a sing-song quality, if you will. We're going to see a lot of that throughout the book because it is a common characteristic of Hebrew poetry. The wicked are like this. The righteous are like this. The wise are like this, but the fool is like that. Chapter 4. Chapter 4 has the fourth My Child section. This one doesn't start with My Child. It starts with children. We're going to see the My Child in verse 20. But this one is very unique. This one starts off with Solomon speaking to all of the kids at once. He hasn't done that yet. It doesn't mean the other kids couldn't listen in, that they weren't included in the instruction, but now he calls all the kids together. He says, kids, everybody come close to me. And what we find in verse 4 is that Solomon is teaching his kids what King David taught to him. He starts off speaking to all of his kids in verse 1. He says, children, listen to the instruction of a father and be attentive in order to know insight. For I have given you good instruction. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son to my father, and who's that? That is King David. When I was a little boy, King David was my dad. I was tender and alone, verse 3, before my mother. He taught me and said to me. Now, this is King David speaking now. David says to Solomon, may your heart hold fast to my words. Who does that sound like? Solomon, in all those verses we just read, where he kept going, kids, listen to me. Kids, I'm telling you. Why? Because his dad went to him, Solomon, listen to me. Solomon, I'm telling you. Guard my commandments and live. Verse 5, get wisdom and insight. Do not forget, and do not turn from the sayings of my mouth. Now, this is an Anthony thought here. I do not have anything to base this off of. But I wonder, is that command right there, to get wisdom, to get insight, is that why Solomon asked for wisdom in 1 Kings chapter 3? Of all the things he could ask for, he asked for this, understanding. Help me to judge your people for who can lead this great people of yours. Is it because his father David said, son, this is what you need. This is what you're going to need to be a good king. It's just a thought. Verse 6. All right. Do not forsake her. He's talking about wisdom. Do not forsake her, then she will guard you. David talks about wisdom as a woman as well. And so Solomon picks up the same idea. Why? Because this is something we need to hold fast to. This is something that we need to guard. And if we guard wisdom and we hide it within our heart, then she'll do what? Verse 6, she will guard you. Love her, and she will keep you. The beginning of wisdom, get wisdom. With all that is in your possession, gain insight. Verse 7 is my favorite verse about wisdom because it's so obvious and blunt. In my Bible, in the margin, I have written, in all you're getting, get wisdom. In all you're obtaining, obtain wisdom. In all that you accumulate wisdom, because it's the only thing that matters. It is the most important possession that you own. In all you're getting, get wisdom. Now, verse 7 is interesting because it says the beginning of wisdom is get wisdom. Well, great. It's like going to apply for a job, and they go, we'd love to hire you, but you don't have enough experience. And you're like, well, I can't get any experience if you don't give me a job. And the beginning of wisdom is to get wisdom that seems so circular. And then we're told in Proverbs 1:7, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So which one is it? It's both. It's both because only when you have a reverential awe of the Lord will you begin to see his ways better than your ways, and that's wisdom. That change in mindset is instantaneous. You can't say that he's the Lord, but then refuse all of his ways. They happen together. And the moment that we realize that God is who he is, that's when we gain that first little bit of wisdom and we begin to want so much more. David continues in verse 8. He says, cherish her, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will give a garland for your head. She will bestow a crown of glory upon you. She elevates you. Wisdom lifts you up. Listen, my child, in verse 10. Take my sayings, and the years of your life shall be great. In the way of wisdom I have instructed you. I have led you in the path of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered. And if you run, you will not stumble. So verse 13, and look at the power of the verse. Seize the instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. And that is a good verse to have underlined, highlighted, marked, and arrows. Because remember who's saying this? It's David, not just King David, David the warrior. And when he says, seize it, do not let go, guard her, these are military terms that he's using. When I was still in the police department, it was very common for officers to have two nightmares. One nightmare would be to be chasing somebody in a foot chase, and no matter how hard you ran, you just could not catch up to them. But the other nightmare that was very common was for you to have your gun drawn, and someone was trying to steal it from you and take it from you so they could shoot you with it. And your hands never felt so weak. It's like you couldn't hold on to that weapon hard enough. You were squeezing with all of your might, and it felt like your fingers were just being peeled off of it. And you would wake up, and your hand would be so tight and your muscles so clenched that you couldn't let it go. And you would have to sit there and just wait to calm down before your hands were finally able to let go of the phantom gun you'd been holding on to in your sleep. Seize the instruction. It is that kind of dynamic. Do not let it go. Guard her. Why? Because she is your life. Not because she's good, not because it's fun, it's your life. It is so important to understand the power of verse 13. Verse 14, in the path of the wicked do not go. Do not walk in the way of those who do evil. Avoid it. Do not transgress it. Don't even go and dabble with it. Don't even cross the borders of it. Instead, do what? Verse 15, turn away from it and pass by. Because they're wicked. They will not sleep if they have not done wrong. They are robbed of their sleep if they do not cause stumbling. They are so wicked, they can't get a good night's sleep unless they go and they mess with somebody. Verse 17, for they ate the bread of wickedness, and they drank the wine of violence. But, and here's the contrast in verse 18, the path of the righteous one is like the light of dawn, leading and shining until the day is full. The way of the wicked ones is like deep darkness. They do not know what they stumble over. They know that they're stumbling, but they can't see what it is. Now, that's the end of David's words. And remember this. David is not as wise as Solomon. Later on, we're going to see all his counselors turn, not all his counselors, when counselors turn against him in the rebellion of Absalom, he doesn't go, well, I'll stay here and outsmart them. What does he do? He convinces one of his buddies who's really smart and goes, could you stay here and try to defeat their counsel? Because if not, we're going to be in trouble. David never lifted himself up as the smartest in the group, but he had this, the fear of the Lord. And he understood if that defined his life, then the rest would follow. In verse 20, Solomon returns to the earlier format by saying, my child, be attentive to my words. To my sayings incline your ear. May they not escape from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart. For they are life to those who find them and healing to the entire body. Just another great verse. Verse 23, with all vigilance keep your heart, for from it comes the source of life. Remove from yourself deceitful speech and abolish devious talk from yourself. May your eyes look forward and your gaze be straight before you. May the path of your foot be balanced and all your ways be sure. Do not swerve right or left. Remove your foot from evil. Now, chapter 5 is the last chapter that we're going to go into. I know I've asked a lot of you, please stay with me just a little bit longer. In chapter 5, we have my child, section number 6. Here, Solomon is warning a male child about sexual sin and begging him, exhorting him to protect the intimacy with his wife. Verse 1, my child, be attentive to my wisdom, and to my understanding incline your ear. In order to keep prudence and knowledge will guard your lips. For the lips of the strange woman will drip honey, and smoother than oil is her mouth. But her end is bitter as the wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of Sheol. She does not observe the path of life. Her ways wander. She does not know it. Now, he just told him, his kid, what he needs to be aware of, right? And in verse 7, he goes and says the exact same thing again. He reloads and he goes right back into the topic. Verses 3 through 6 and verses 7 through 14 form a double exhortation over the exact same topic. But what that does is conveys to us what a danger this is, particularly to men, particularly to leaders. Verse 7. Now, O children, listen to me. Now, he's talking to all the kids again, right? Do not depart from the sayings of my mouth. Keep your paths far from her, and do not go near to the door of her house, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless. The idea there in verse 9 is that you give the best years of your life to those who don't even care about you. Verse 10, lest strangers take their fill of your strength, and your labors go to the house of a foreigner, and you groan at your end when your flesh and body are consumed, and say, how I hated discipline, and I despised reproof, and I did not listen to the voice of my teachers, and I did not incline my ear to my instructors. I was almost at utter ruin in the midst of the assembly and congregation. After the double exhortation against the negative now, we now have the positive exhortation. He goes, don't do this, doubly don't do this. Do this, beginning in verse 15. Drink water from your own cistern and flowing waters from inside your own well. Until you go to Israel, you don't understand how special this verse is. When we were in the area that's Judea, and we're like, wow, this is the biggest part of it, right? It's going to be really neat. We just left Capernaum and all the green, and it's awesome, and there's banana plantations everywhere, and it's really great. And then you go into Judea, and you realize it's like all desert. And you're like, why did we get this part? I mean, everybody else gets the lake and the seas and stuff like this, and this is all wilderness and ravines. But when you're in that area, there's a quality to the people that live within it. The austereness and the toughness and the resilience, but also the wisdom. Because if there's no water out there, your largest body of water is the Dead Sea. You don't want to drink it. It does not sustain life. So your only hope to live and survive in that land is to capture the flash floods that come from the early rains and the latter rains, and to dig cisterns that will fill it up. This is why God keeps stressing to them, don't go and pour water into cisterns that don't hold water. Make sure that you take care of this. Every single year they go into them, even now for the Bedouin tribes, and they'll go into them and they'll clean them out and they'll replaster the walls because there can be no cracks in it. Because after the rains are gone, it is way too late to find out you didn't do a good job. Because when you need that life-giving water that will sustain your life and you go into that cistern and it's all gone, then what is your hope? This is how you have to protect it. This is how cherished it is to you. That's your water in your cistern. So it must be protected. Even the tiniest crack will cause it to fail. All of it must be preserved. All of it must be protected. You don't want flowing waters inside your own well to do what we see in verse 16. Should springs be scattered outward, in the streets shall there be streams of water. Because this is what's going to happen if you don't protect your cistern, if you don't defend your well. You don't want her stepping out on you. You don't go stepping out on her. Protect it, replaster it, maintain it, keep it safe. Instead, those waters inside that cistern, verse 17, may they be yours alone, and not for strangers who are with you. May your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Now, notice these very tender terms he's going to use starting in verse 19. We're going to see this in Song of Solomon as well. She is a deer of love and a doe of grace. There's such tender terms he uses. May her breast satisfy you always. By her love, may you be intoxicated continually. Why should you be intoxicated, my child, by a strange woman, and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? For before the eyes of Yahweh are human ways. In other words, God sees everything. You don't fool him. In all his ways, all the ways of man, all the paths of man, he examines. His iniquities shall ensnare him, the evildoer, and in the vanity of his sin he shall be caught. He shall die for lack of discipline, and in the greatness of his folly he shall be lost. That's where we're going to end for today. We'll pick up with the next My Child section. We'll keep driving towards chapter 10. We're still trying to figuring out our pace because, again, this is unique. This is odd for the rest of the AC3 that we are doing. As we go in other areas that aren't so soliloquy based, because again, these are kind of lectures from a dad to a kid. When we start going into the various Proverbs as we go, I will try to explain the ones that make sense to me or that I've struggled with and I had to noodle out a bit, right? But if I run into one and I for whatever reason, don't sit and explain it, and you have issues with it, stop me. Call out my name and say, Anthony, I'm not getting this one. This one doesn't make sense. We'll sit and talk about it. Remember, these are penned by Solomon. They're from the mind of God, so there's going to be ones that you and I just will not get. We'll try, though. This is what this is a lot more interactive than the rest of AC3. The rest of it is we're running full bore and as fast as we can, but this one, we just kind of have to take our time. And we're going to enjoy the wisdom of God just being poured into us. Because remember what the purpose of the entire book is. It's to teach us the fear of the Lord. To weave that one answer throughout all aspects of our lives. And that's why this book is going to be so very good for us. And I can't wait. I can't wait. So, Father, we love you. We thank you for your grace, the beauty of you, who you are, and just the magnificence of this time together. I thank you